Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to another Webinar Wednesday hosted by CSU Bakersfield Small Business Development Center. This is Managing Your Small Business Beyond That Pesky Pandemic, number 128 in our series. Got a great guest this week, Dr. Hegde, who is our economics chair at CSU Bakersfield. So before we bring in Dr. Hegde, who is on his way over to our downtown global CSUB SBDC headquarters here in beautiful downtown Bakersfield, just getting out of the first week of class with his class that's going well. It's good to know that we're part of America's SBDCs. So what's up today? Today being August the 24th, 2022. Well, our economic corner that we talk about and have for much of this year, as the economic news has been such a dominant feature and such a crucial area for our small businesses, is turning into economic four corners today. Yes, we're going to be well represented and have the head, the chief. He'd be the chief economist if he was at a corporation. Aaron Hegde in just a little bit, and he will talk about what's going on around everywhere with our economy. So you're also going to get my observations of the hospitality industry. Pretty much at this point in time, the last 2 weeks on the road throughout our Central California region and also throughout our Kern, and Mono County areas gave me the chance to talk with a number of people in the hospitality industry and those that are in restaurants and lodging establishments and others. And so I will be sharing some of my observations with you, some of the things I found out, basically how they're tilted toward the hospitality industry. We'll also look at the Capital Quarter today. And Capital Quarter, we'll look at the Eastern Sierra Capital Summit that's coming up. We'll be sharing a lot of the content that's going to be happening right on down the road with you. We'll look and see what's going on in business. Just a quick observation in business is big retailers continue to struggle. Big retailers, they were talking Macy's, Nordstrom's, we're talking also Bed Bath & Beyond and many others that are continuing to struggle beyond the pandemic, where many of them, including Target, thrived during the pandemic. Making that adjustment to the recovery afterwards, not so easy. So our EIDL is back in the news, and EIDL, really going to be real brief with EIDL today. Many of you that have EIDL loans, those will be coming due. So they will be coming due, and also in addition to needing to start making that monthly repayment for that 3.75% interest rate that you have for the next 30 years, which comes down to potentially the steal of this decade. 3.75% money for 30 years, but that could start coming due. Also, it's important to remember for those of you that have the EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, that if there is anything that happens with any of the assets in your business, because this was a secured loan by SBA, the extent on how it was secured is how large the loan was. If you got one of those whoppers that we like to call them around here, the $2 million loan or maybe $1.5 million up, there's a good chance that was secured by real property. If you got some of the smaller ones, the average EIDL loan for a long time was $150,000. Most likely you only have filed against you a blanket exemption on your assets. But still, it precludes you when you go to sell any particular asset that you have that has value, because that is pretty much secured and is basically collateralized by that SBA loan. You need to contact the SBA's call center in Texas. So keep that in mind as you move forward, maybe growing your business, maybe surviving in your business, that you're going to need to, if you sell assets and have an EIDL loan, you're going to need to let SBA know about that. We're going to give you a quick update on these remaining programs that are here and going on. There's only a few that are really kind of up and going. Talk a little bit more about our Dream Fund that looks good for those that still want to apply and still want to go through the program and get the $5,000 or $10,000. And as always, we'll take your questions, and not always, we're not going to have the poll again. 2 weeks in a row, the first time in the last 128 weeks, we have not had a poll in successive weeks, but a lot of content to go over. Want to save all that time for it. The key programs that are happening right now, we have the California Performing Arts Grant Program that is open. That program is first come, first serve. You're going to want to see the lendistry.com website. Last I heard, the program is still open. They have nearly $50 million. We'll go over that briefly. The California Dream Fund, if you have any interest in that particular program, send it to us at SBDC at csub.edu. It looks like there's going to be funding to continue. We thought that there might be a time where the allocations of those $5,000 or $10,000 to start a small business, that money would be gone, but it's still there. It still looks like it's going to be there for months later. So if you have interest in that particular program. So we talked a little bit about EIDL. We're going to skip again the State Small Business Credit Initiative with that wonderful acronym of SSBCI, and continue to wait until it opens up on October 1st, right around the time of the Eastern Sierra Capital Summit. Your California Micro Grant Program is open, it has time and money. We'll give you a few more details on that. Mono County, up in beautiful Mono County, where they honor their veterans. And I have proof. So in Mono County, they have a grant and forgivable loan program. It's open. You're going to want to see one of the Jeffs up there, preferably Jeff Simpson, the Economic Development Manager, or actually now the Economic Development Director. Congratulations, Jeff. And he will fill you in on all the information in Mono County. The Employee Retention Credit. Remember, the Employee Retention Credit ended as of the third quarter of 2021 on 9/30/2021. And when it ended on 9/30/21, it didn't really end, because you can still go back retroactively by filing a payroll tax reform and amended the 941X and still take advantage of that credit. And also on our list, the Cal State Bakersfield CEI, the Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation Accelerator program, starts in September. It's really your last chance to get in, and really something you would want to do right away, and we'll give you information on that coming up. So about $49.5 million in this California nonprofit performing arts program. Again, it's for nonprofits. That's the key thing to remember here. And it's to encourage workforce development. So workforce development plays a big key in this particular program. If you know somebody who is interested, it goes back again to the tax year of 2019, like so many of our programs that we deal with. 2019, the last full taxable year before the pandemic struck. And a lot of these are still pandemic related programs, even though we are well into 2022 and hopefully well into a very nice recovery. So grant monies for those programs, and payroll cost, health benefit, insurance premiums. So they're pretty much payroll related for those that have employees in the particular program. If you're interested in the Dream Fund grant, the Dream Fund grant is still open, and we are still training people through our Central California regions. Currently filling the October training class, trying to get a couple going earlier, so we might be able to have something going in September. You know, completion of the training class does not necessarily mean that you will be funded. You will need to complete a business plan, receive consulting with the SBDC. After you do the training class, then get the information, and the applicant needs to go into lendistry.com to claim their either $5,000 or $10,000 grant to start a small business. Obviously, there's conditions that apply, and an entry into the training or consulting or training or business plan preparation does not guarantee funding. But as I said earlier, right now it is likely. So again, when you go into this program, this is an opportunity for you. Look at it as an opportunity. Don't look at it as $5,000 once you jump through these hoops, because they are time consuming and they should be meaningful. They should be laying the foundation for your business. If you have a business you want to build a sustainable business, and laying that foundation is spending the time to do the proper thought, to go through the training, to learn the techniques and some of the crucial steps in operating a small business. You're going to want to complete your business plan and then discuss that with your SBDC consultant. So please use this as an opportunity to build a sustainable business that you can grow into something and be proud of and pass on to your future generations. The California Micro Grant Program for Kern County, a county-wide program that is in some of the 58 counties. The county of Kern took the initiative to apply through the California Office of the Small Business Advocate. This provides $2,500 for eligible small businesses. Again, a lot of eligibility requirement here. If you don't qualify, don't apply. Must be your main source of income, sales of less than $50,000 in the taxable year 2019. There's an employer requirement, and you could not have received the California Relief Grant through Lindustry.com earlier. If you are interested and you think you can apply, we encourage you to sign up at the SBDC and become one of our actual SBDC clients, and you can receive free one-on-one consulting and look at the bigger picture to grow your micro business to a particular point to where, again, we're growing sustainable businesses that grow and continue on. And you can call our office, 661-654-2856 for more information. Economic Corner today. Well, Economic Corner today is going to be good. So I'm going to just skip that slide. Capital Corner today is going to be brief. You know, our Eastern Sierra Capital Summit is going to come up. An in-person and a virtual event will be October the 7th. We will have dozens of opportunities for small businesses and those wanting to start a small business to access capital. Got a little trigger handy there, but we will be you will have dozens of opportunities to access capital, presenters sharing information. And again, this is in person and virtual. We'll have more information later. The good folks that are going to have money here are going to be available, I'm pretty sure. And that would be the Capital Access Program through the California Pollution Control Financing Authority, program called CalCap, where they have collateral support and also loan guarantee programs. And there's going to be a huge amount of money rolling out once the U.S. Treasury gives it to the state of California, which hopefully will be someday soon. Our CSU Bakersfield CIE, the Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, New Venture Accelerator program, a 10-week boot camp, 4 hours per Saturday. It's a commitment, people. It's a commitment, but it really gives you the opportunity to work with CSUB faculty, industry experts, and let me just add, I think also maybe key staff people on venture creation, such as value proposition, but minimal viable product, consumer and customer validation. And that customer development is really such a key part. It is really the one in that bullet that I really like and really hope that it spend a lot of time figuring out who your customers could be, who they will be before you decide to build a product or go into business. It's really the biggest change of the last 15 years. It has been really a shift from where you go in and you do market research and you analyze markets to where you analyze who your customers will be. Customer validation and also consumer development, really, really huge. So our first cohort for this is September in 2022. You're going to want to contact Dr. Bach, Associate Dean of the School of Business and Associate Dean of the School of Business and Public Administration. Sometimes I talk too fast for my own good. And that was a perfect example. Or Dr. Jeremy Woods. You see their information there. Maureen is back. She is back. Iris did a great job last week, but she is filling up the chat. You will see 5 items in the chat right now. Those are the programs that we have just discussed. If you want that information, go in and pull it, and it is yours. Okay. Our marketing moment with our marketing maven, Maureen, is on hiatus until next week. Maureen is back with us this week, but she's a little jet lagged. She's a little fatigued. She's a little bit still on euphoria from a little bit of vacation time. So we cut her some slack and gave her an extra week. And plus, you know, she is not even going to attend the 26th annual Kern County Hispanic Chamber of Commerce Business Expo and Conference, which is tonight. So if you have the opportunity, check us out. We will be there. The SBDC will have our booth there. The School of Business and Public Administration will be there. Also, our webinars, almost all of them from the last 128 are on YouTube. You can go check those out. We also have some vintage ones that go back to 2013, our YouTube channel, CSUB SBDC. Subscribe, check out some of the stuff that's back there. And that brings us to our special guest. Our special guest, come on in here, Dr. Aaron S. Aaron Hegde. And you are going to get the microphone. You're going to get all of these controls after I introduce you. As you can see, I used invisible ink because at times I like to be challenged. And at times I think I know people well enough to where I can introduce them from an old brain. And here we go. So our special guest this week, wearing the bow tie, I'm glad to say, report, is Dr. S. Aaron Hegde. First of all, I'd like to report that Dr. Hegde is a citizen of 3 countries. The latest to be in the United States of America. 2.
Not a citizen of India anymore. I have to give it up.
Okay, he gave it up though, so he could have been 3. So he is a citizen of 2 North American countries, the last of which I had the privilege of watching the naturalization ceremony at our Dore Theater back in 2019, which was a very moving experience, and I recommend you go through that. I missed my own daughter-in-law because I was too busy here when she went through hers in San Jose, California, but I was able to see Dr. Hegde's. So now on to more meaningful stuff. Aaron is the chair of our school, of our economics department for the School of BPA, meaning that he has done a lot of great things to become the chair. Like I said earlier, that means he's like the chief economist at a major corporation almost. He's done some great things. I want him to talk about, before he gets into his presentation, some of the things that he has brought to the school, meaning a center through the economics department, and received endowment, and also they're doing some great work and starting to do even more great work. So I will save that for you and not steal your thunder there. Also, Aaron was a participant in Webinar Wednesday, pandemic webinar number 68. So actually, exactly 60 weeks ago, you were here, and really is the greatest bow tie wearer I've ever met in the history of mankind. So Dr. Hegde, thank you for joining us. I have hacked your introduction, and maybe my brain doesn't work well with invisible ink after all, so please take it away.
Oh,
Right there's your button.
okay. Great. Thank you, Kelly. And your brain on invisible ink works better than most on visible ink. So nothing to be shy about. And thank you for that wonderful, wonderful introduction. I'm not sure it's all deserved, but and you asked me to talk a little bit about stuff I've done. And to be honest, I'm not really comfortable talking about all the stuff that I've done because it's always teamwork. But we do have at CSUB a Grimm Center for Agriculture Business, in fact, Grimm Family Center for Agriculture Business, which was through the efforts of our President Zelensky meeting with many people from the ag community, but finally the Grimm family, through their generosity, giving us $5 million to help establish a center. And that center has been busy for the last couple of years, and looking forward to doing a lot of things. We do also have an ag business program that's offered through the economics department. We've had that since about 2016 as a bachelor's degree, and since 2012 we had it as a concentration in our business degree. So we've graduated quite a lot of students over the years who are all, I'm happy to say, gainfully employed. So so thank you for having me here. I wouldn't go as far as saying chief economist. I'm just the department chair because it was my turn, and everybody moved back, so I was left standing there. So that's how I ended up being there. So I appreciate that being here, and I thought I would share some thoughts. I'm just coming from class, So please excuse me if I'm in my class instructor brain mode, but I'll try to do that. I thought I'd share some thoughts I had about what's happening with our economy. But to be able to make sure we all understand what's happening, I just wanted to review some basic economics and kind of look at some of the current state of the economy in certain aspects. Inflation is on the minds of a lot of people. And then looking at some monetary policy in terms of what the Federal Reserve does to combat inflation. And more specifically, since this is a Small Business Development Center's webinar, just one aspect of what's happening in the economy, the impact on small business. All of this stuff has an impact on the small business, but specifically focusing on labor and then some concluding thoughts. So just as a background in terms of introductory economics, prices are generally determined in the market with the interaction of supply and demand. So supply is what the producers are willing and able to sell, and demand is what consumers are willing and able to buy. So that interaction of those two forces leads to these market prices. And market prices can either increase or decrease or stay constant. And since we're thinking about inflation, I'll focus more on the increase part. So market prices increase one of a couple of different ways. One is if the supply decreases, could be for any reason. So in this pandemic, we've had some supply chain issues, so the supply has decreased because of that. And as a result, the prices increase. You can see a price increase also as a result of increase in demand. And again, during the pandemic and other times when people start demanding more of something, that also leads to an increase in price. And of course, the two forces can work together, as also happened during the pandemic, where the supply is decreased and at the same time, demand is increased. So then this has a larger impact on the price change, which is really what we've been seeing the last couple of years. So inflation then is, so this is what I just said is an increase in price of one particular commodity that we may be considering. So inflation then is the increase in the general level of prices of many goods. And the way we measure it, and you've probably heard this term often, is using a basket of goods and measuring or monitoring the cost of that basket of goods over time. This is what we call the consumer price index. So the changes in that index become the percentage changes, which then become the inflation. And so what do companies do with that increase in price? Well, they could pass it along to their consumers, or they may have to absorb it. Depends on quite a few things, but one of the concepts that it depends on, and again, you may have heard this in the news media and stuff, is what's known as elasticity. Elasticity is how sensitive a particular group is to changes in price. So obviously, in terms of the demand, if the price goes up, then the quantity that's demanded decreases. And if the price goes down, the quantity demanded increases. So it has that inverse relationship. So elasticity then measures how much that changes, what percentage. So if something is considered to be elastic, that means that for a small increase in price, then the demand will decrease by a greater percentage than the increase in price, and then vice versa. So same thing can apply to the supply elasticity. So that's important because depending on which kind of commodity you have, where people are sensitive to price changes. So for instance, if you're a diabetic and you take insulin, you can't afford to be very sensitive to changes in price. So this is what we call an inelastic demand. So even if the price goes up, you won't cut back your consumption because it's something you need to have. And something that's elastic could be maybe, just some kind of like a bread or something that if the price goes up, maybe you switch a different kind of bread or, a different kind of breakfast item or any of those kinds of things. So that's important because it kind of determines how much of this increase in price that everybody's experienced that you can pass along to the consumers. So the Federal Reserve is tasked then with controlling that inflation. And they do that through what we call monetary policy. And their goal is to, and actually that's a goal that they've been given or been charged with, is to keep that inflation under 2%. And for the most part, they do that. They do keep it under 2%, but sometimes things happen. And again, in the 70s, and that was another example, and obviously more recently, where they're not able to necessarily keep it, or they're trying to do that. And one of the ways they do that is what we call like open market operations, which is where they buy and sell these treasury bonds. And as a result, that impacts this federal funds rate, which is the rate at which banks can borrow from the Federal Reserve. And then that has a cascading effect with interest rates in the rest of the economy. So one of the reasons why they would do that is to be able to temper the demand. So when you look at our economy, 70% of our economy comes from consumption. So if you can temper that demand and people reduce their consumption, then the argument is just like with an increase in demand increases the price, a decrease in demand would then decrease the price or lead to pressures on the price to be lower. The Federal Reserve, however, cannot do much about the supply side of things. And this is where we have this conundrum today, where they increase the interest rate to kind of temper the demand, but we still see inflation. Part of it is because of the supply side effects, the decrease in supply, the supply chain issues we've had. So that means that the Federal Reserve policy may not be a certain thing. And you can see that the impact of that, the markets reacting, the stock markets and things like that. So we'll look at that in just a minute. So again, when you look at the supply and demand, what are these factors or determinants that really impact the demand? So as we would always know, that it's the market price, right? So consumer looks at the market price and says, okay, I'm going to buy or not buy, or how much I'm going to buy, and their income. So one of the things we said is demand is like the willingness and the ability of consumers to buy something. So the ability comes from price, market price of that commodity, and also income. Their willingness comes from what we call taste and preferences. Do I like to drive around in an electric car? Then I'll probably prefer to buy a Tesla versus a Ford F-150, not the electric one, but just a regular Ford F-150. And then also expectations. If I expect that Costco will sell out of toilet paper because people are buying that, then I'll go rush to Costco and buy toilet paper, which I probably otherwise wouldn't have. So the expectations also. And so these all played a key role during the pandemic in changing or shifting that demand that led to this increased prices. And we'll talk about that in just a minute, but those are some of the determinants of demand. There's also these determinants of supply. So just like the consumer decides on how much they're going to buy and what they're going to buy, producers also decide on how much of something they're willing to produce, or if they want to get into producing something. And obviously their cost of production, or what we call the input price, has a big impact on that. And again, during the pandemic, a lot of the input prices changed, increased. So if you're farming, price of fertilizers went up. If you're using energy of any kind, then the price of energy went up. And of course, labor, which is another input into production. Some of the wages of labor also went up. So all of these determine how much a supplier would produce, as well as the technology. If something, you improve the technology and you're able to produce something at a lower price, then you're probably going to produce more. And then of course, the competition too. And especially here, we talk about related goods. So is a commodity that you're producing, is it easily substitutable? Like, can another competitor provide that same thing? Or is another product that the consumer might think is a substitute for this, and would, if your price goes up, would they then switch to that other commodity? Or would the other one we call is a complement, which is where the two things consume together. So if the price of gasoline keeps going up, then people probably would not demand as many combustible engine vehicles and would rather switch to an electric vehicle. So those are some basic economic concepts, like a rundown of our Econ 101, just so that it sets the stage for the next few things we'll talk about it, which is address some of the things that happened in the pandemic. Because as economists, we're better at looking at the past and explaining what happened than perhaps forecasting what might happen in the future. Some of us do that, but there's no guarantee we'll be right. So one of the things that happened during the pandemic, as you'll see from this graph, is that more people started to work from home. In some instances, because they couldn't go to work, and other instances because they preferred to work from home. And as a result, one of the things you do when you're at home is make food at home. The other thing is many of the restaurants had shut down. So part of the focus in the rest of the things I talk about will be focused on restaurants. So I know there are a lot of other kinds of small businesses out there, but restaurants tend to be a good example from which we can draw some inferences that can be applied across other businesses. So you'll see that over time, when you're looking at the consumption of food at home. So there's a difference. So either you prepare, so you buy ingredients and things and you prepare food at home, or you go out to a restaurant to eat. So that's what we mean is food preparation at home versus going outside. And then if you look at on the left-hand side, the slide shows the difference between those who were working from home versus those who were working away from home and what they were doing. So the green bars are those who worked away from home, and the blue bars are those who worked at home. So you can see that food preparation and eating at home was higher for those who worked from home rather than those who worked away from home. And the same thing in terms of the time spent in preparing. So if you're at home, even if you're working from home, presumably you have a little more time, although many of us were probably busier working from home than we were when we were working at our workplace. But the typical time spent preparing food was higher for those who worked at home versus those who didn't. And then eating at home, as you can see, was a lot higher for those who worked at home versus those who worked away from home. So what does this mean in terms of prices and all those things? So here is a chart showing you the change in prices between November 2019, which is before the pandemic, through November 2020, which is right during the pandemic. And you can see the price of a lot of things that we consume at home. And typically that's included in our consumer price index, the basket of goods that we look at. And you can see the increase in percentages, like with the animal products like beef, pork, poultry, all going up. And there's different reasons for it too. This was, if you remember, during this time, the early part of the pandemic, you had many of the slaughterhouses where people were called in sick and they couldn't go to work. So that kind of slowed down things. And so the production, so here is an example of a decrease in supply. So the demand didn't change. In fact, the demand went up, but there was a decrease in supply. So both added to where you see this increase in price of a little more than 8% for beef and veal, about 5% for pork, and about 7% or so for poultry, and the rest that you see there. So again, an instance of supply a decrease in supply resulting in an increase in price. And if you look at this other chart, it shows you how much of the food was consumed at home and how much of the food was consumed away from home. So away includes all types of food at retail establishments. So sit-down restaurants, the fast food restaurants, and things like that. And you can see even before the pandemic, so there's the dotted line kind of is where we started the pandemic. And you can see there's a little bit of a variance in the sales in restaurants and such. But then after the pandemic, and especially when the pandemic was just started in March, you see that steep drop where many restaurants closed and people just stayed home and all this. And then eventually, as people started getting vaccinated and the economy started opening up, you see that increase in the restaurant sales, so people eating out more. So this is from May to October of 2020 is where you see this really rapid increase in that consumption. And if you look at the US as a whole in terms of retail and all of this, you can see again this drastic drop right when the pandemic hit, and then a slow recovery. So this is what we call this V shape, where there's a drastic drop and then just this drastic increase, because even though it was probably 2-3 months, a lot of people were frustrated staying at home. So many went out to restaurants, and some restaurants are opening up and setting outdoor patios and things like that. So the sales started coming back up, and then to present where it's even higher than it was before the pandemic. How am I doing on time? So the next topic to talk about is inflation. On everybody's minds, in all the media, you keep hearing about inflation. And so thought, again, remember, this is like the general increase, the increase in the general level of prices, not just one or two commodities. So even during inflationary time periods, there may be some commodities where the prices actually go down or stay the same, but in general, things rise. So here's a graphical representation of the specific sectors and by how much things changed. So you can see this is from June of 2021 through June of 2022 over that 1 year period. And the biggest expense has been gasoline, 60% increase. For the typical consumer, this is where that inflation hits home because a good portion of your budget goes towards gas, driving, especially if you're commuting to work. And then a 60% increase will obviously hurt. And then airline fares, part of it is during the pandemic, there weren't too many people flying, traveling. And then after vaccinations and things and opening up of the economies, people started flying again. And so the airline fares to go up, but also because airlines also rely on gasoline or petroleum oil. And so that part of that cost also. And so again, this is about, remember, we think about elasticity. If you have a combustible engine gas vehicle that uses gas, in the short term, there's not much you can do. You might drive less or may combine trips and things, but there's not much of an alternative. Over the long term, you can get a different type of vehicle. But again, because of these supply chain issues, if you were to switch to a hybrid or a plug-in hybrid or an electric car, there were long waits because computer chip issues and production issues and things like that. So people had to keep consuming gasoline in the short run. And you already starting to see this where more and more electric vehicles or plug-in hybrids are making their way onto American roads because of that high cost of gasoline and also the availability of well-designed electric vehicles. And then the food items that we talked about, eggs going up 13%, chicken of 33%, sorry, and chicken going up 18%, milk and all these other things. During last summer, the new vehicles and the used vehicles went up a lot. So this is an average over the last year from June 21 to June 22. So it doesn't seem like it went up as much as gasoline or other things, but this was one of the driving forces of the inflation early on when we first started seeing this inflation, which, as you can see in the last bar from June 21 to June 22, that's an increase of 9.1%. So it's an annualized rate of that 9%, which has been one of the highest in the last 4 decades. So how high is it? You can see this is the period in 2020 after the recessionary time, and those dark bars, the shaded bars are when we have recessions. So I'll get into that in just a minute, what do we mean by recession. But you can see, obviously, in the 70s and 80s, when inflation was really high. And before that, it wasn't price stability is the other word for it, is where you try to control inflation, wasn't really a goal that was pursued very vigorously. After that, because of all of the impact of inflation, and there's a lot of the impact, but without going into it, as a detrimental impact on the economy. So the Federal Reserve made it a point and had more instruments and things to try to control inflation and have more price stability. And then you can see between the 80s and about up to 2020, pretty decent job of trying to control. There were instances where it was above 2%, but for the most part, they tried to control it. And then you see in 2020, after the pandemic, there's that one sliver, a shaded sliver, and that's when we had a recession in the early part of 2020. And then you can see the inflation rate increasing since then. And one of the ways, as I said, the Federal Reserve combats this is by impacting the interest rates. So at their last meeting, they increased the interest rate 75 basis points or 0.75%. And the expectation is when they meet again in September, I think it's September 21st, they are looking to perhaps increase. So this Friday, in fact, the Federal Reserve chairperson, Jerome Powell, will give a speech in Jackson, Wyoming, I believe, where there's all these central bankers and stuff that gather about what they expect. So this will be the first signal of whether or not the Federal Reserve will raise the rate, and if so, how much. Some of the more recent data seems to indicate there's been a slowdown in the inflation. We still have the price increasing, but not at the rate it was previously. And if that's the case, then the Federal Reserve may not raise the interest rate as much as it did in the past. But that remains to be seen. We'll know more after Friday. The part of the fear is if they were to raise the interest rate too much, it might adversely affect the economy. Because again, these interest rates determine the cost of borrowing, for instance. So if a business wants to borrow money, it's obviously a lot more now than it was previously. As Mr. Bearden was mentioning, if you can get a 30-year loan for 3.75%, it's a good to lock it in because more than likely it's going to go up. Same thing with mortgages, same thing with car loans. They're all starting to increase. So that's the inevitable result of the Federal Reserve trying to control inflation. So because of the fact that they haven't been as successful, some people start questioning the effectiveness of the policy or the uncertainty of its impact. So you can see here, since early January 2020 through now, the blue line is an index. So they've used various measures to calculate an index of uncertainty. So the lower that index, the less uncertain. And so you can see the blue line is in general uncertainty for the economy for the US. And the red line is the uncertainty of the monetary policy. And you can see generally there's been more trust and certainty in the Federal Reserve's actions. But as of late, from January of this year, it's pretty close to the uncertainty of the economy. So that matters in how the stock markets react. So again, stock markets not necessarily are the only indication of an economy's health, but many pensions and such are tied up with stock markets. So that also has an impact on the expectations that people have in terms of what the economy will do and such. So given all of this data, some economists believe that we might be headed for a recession. And this particular chart, again, the shaded regions are the recessions, and the solid line is the probability of a recession. So again, using various data that's available, they look at what is the likelihood that we might see the recession in the near future. And you can see that there's a direct match between this probability and the recession. So the textbook definition of a recession is where you have two consecutive quarters of the GDP decreasing, which is what has happened in the last 2 quarters. But the official definition of a recession, it's decided by the National Bureau of Economic Research, or NBER, and there's a team that looks at all of this data and decides whether or not we're in a recession. So this kind of has the probability, and you can see those shaded areas are that the NBER economists deciding that this is a recession. And you can see that there's a very direct correlation between that and the probability of a recession. And most recently, you see that in 2020, early part of 2020. But as of now, and this is as of July, I think, the likelihood of a recession is low. However, as more data keep coming in, these things change. And the most recent was a survey done by the National Association of Business Economists. And this was, I think, done earlier this week or last week. And now 74% of economists who are members of NABE believe that we will experience a recession in the coming year. And then there's obviously the rest who think either it's a little farther off or that it won't be. But a lot of it depends on how the Federal Reserve reacts in September, and then how the markets react and how the consumers react. So a lot of it is built into expectations. As I said, 70% of the economy is consumer spending, but a lot of that depends on expectations and consumer sentiment. And if people think there's a recession, then they might lose their job, then they may not spend as much, in which case the demand decreases. And if it goes back too much, then the prices fall, then you control inflation. But if people are not buying stuff, the companies may have to lay workers off, in which case you do increase in unemployment, and then that leads to a recession. So in terms of employment, so as I said, the focus I thought for this region may be on labor. And so this chart tells you, so the labor force participation rate is anybody that's over the age of 16 that is looking for work or is willing to work. And so it's also made up of those who are working and those who are not working. So the employed and the unemployed. And so you can see in the various age categories, the number of individuals in that labor force has been declining. And it's steep decline during the pandemic. It's not that people were sent home. That's part of it. That's the unemployment. But people were not even looking for work. And this is the where they called the great retirement, where a lot of people just decided not to enter the labor force or to reset their career choices and perhaps consider different things. This is what made it difficult for a lot of companies to find people. Pre-pandemic, a job posting would take about 30 days from the day of the posting to when a person would start, including the searching and then all the paperwork and all this stuff. During the pandemic and now it's over 50 days. So it takes longer to fill in the same spots. And in some instances, you hear that for every one person looking for a job, there may be one or two job openings. It's just a matter of matching and things. So what does that mean? That means, again, labor is a commodity just like any other. So if the demand for labor has increased and the supply for labor has decreased, then obviously the price, or which is the wage, increases. So here, before the pandemic in Kern County, there's been a steady increase in the number of workers earning wages. And you can see it's one of the higher ones in the counties in the Central Valley. So the supply had been increasing before the pandemic. So the presumption is if the supply is increasing and nothing else changes, then the wages would be under control, maybe even wages decreasing. According to this study by UC Merced, between 2009 and 2019, the average household income in Kern County actually decreased, I think something like 10 or 12%. But when you look at national level data, the wage growth, and the blue line is the average growth, average annual growth before the pandemic. And then you can see the green line is the actual growth. And you can see that right after the pandemic, when the economy started opening up, the wages started growing a lot. So 5 to 6% wage growth. This is nationwide. Again, Kern County is a little different, but nationwide. So supply of labor decreased because not as many people are in the labor force. Demand for labor has increased because the economy is opening up and everybody's coming back. And because of that mismatch, the wage, which is the price of labor, went up. So if you're a small business, you're probably experiencing that to get, and then there are also the regulations, minimum wage regulations and things that kick in. But outside of that, the demand, the market may even be requiring people to pay more than the minimum wage just to attract people. So when you look at the Kern County growth, this is what I was thinking about. Nationally, it had increased, but in Kern County, before the pandemic, over the last even 30, 40 years, it's been kind of declining. And the unemployment rate in Kern County has also been declining during the pandemic. And you'll see it currently as of July, it's 6.6%, which is historically very low. So again, that means that if you're a small business looking for employees, it's harder to fill because there's not that many people looking for work. And if you do find people, you may have to pay more. So given all of that, some concluding thoughts here. Is it possible that we have a recession? Of course, it's possible. And I can't guarantee that there will be one. but a lot of it depends on what the Federal Reserve does over the next couple of meetings and how individuals react, because the demand is still pretty strong. And then we still have these supply chain issues. So unless something else happens, another round of COVID or something else happens in the production, China and all these other supply, then that might have an impact on the prices, which again, we could have what's called stagflation, where the unemployment is increasing, but so is inflation. And then a big part of it is for small business, it really, are those rising costs transferable? So it depends on how elastic the demand is for your good. Are you able to pass it along? And, if you're a restaurant, you can see many have put in a note that says, because of the rising costs, we've increased the cost of these things, specifically meat items. But if you're not able to transfer it along, then you have to, as a small business owner, take on the additional cost, which then has obviously a bottom line on impact on your profits. So that was a quick run through some the history of what happened and some of the basics, and hopefully it hit what you wanted it to hit.
Don't be shy. Don't be shy. As I think I've mentioned to you earlier this year, it's a great time to be an economist.
It always is a great time.
You tell me that, I don't believe it, but I think it's a great time right now to be an economist. Okay, Aaron, you're not going to get out of here that easy without some projections and some predictions based on what we know as of August the 24th. The Federal Reserve today, the chairman is in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and they are meeting with the Kansas City Fed, and they list 3 drivers for inflation. So let's start with inflation and interest rates. And those 3 drivers were globalization and also jobs and labor, and the third being energy. See, I'm under the belief that some information that I've received as I throw out my freelance, it's great to be an economist hat. So I'm going to throw out this to you. Right now, oil yesterday was less than $90 a barrel, which many think that is crazy based on the conditions of what's going on. Goldman Sachs has came out and said at the end of the quarter, they projected to be $120 a barrel, and at the end of the year, $125 a barrel. So basically that means go fill your car up today, people. But also, energy just drives everything with inflation. It drives the cost and flow of goods. It's 60 or 70% of what consumers are paying, but it's everything else we buy is affected by it. Mm-hmm. And until it seems like we get energy policy, I'll give you my projection first. I will say the Fed is going to raise on September 21st. I want to say another 75 basis points, but I'm going to go a little more conservative based on what's going on with jobs, and I'm going 0.5 point.
That sounds about right. I'd say it's just as likely that it would be 0.5% as it would be 0.75%. Some people think it might even be 1%, but I don't think it would be that high.
And some have said that they're not going to raise it at all based on how bullish everything else is, but just based on energy, based on labor, I just am going to go that route. And I'm going to go inflation where we've had a little dip. Our dip could be going away, and I'm an optimist.
We're not. We're the dismal sign, so we're never optimistic about anything.
Okay, so it sounds like we're in agreement. There's going to become an interest rate. There's going to become our dip of inflation could go higher. The sirens are going off. They're going off for a reason. The labor force, I think, could be the bright spot. And the reason is that you talked about so many people pausing their employment. Mm-hmm. And the realist in me comes out and says, that's great that you were able to pause. We had some wonderful pandemic relief programs and federal government rebates, and a lot of people were able to work through this and take a good time to reflect on their lives and what they want to do. But the reality is, with higher inflation, working for a living is going to probably be, for younger generations and at least me, part of that equation.
Yes.
So, and we're also seeing where we're starting to see layoffs from larger companies. These people are being hired relatively quickly.
Yeah, and it's a great time to hire university graduates especially with econ degree or an ag business degrees, and they're eager and willing to work, and actually there's a big demand for them. So if anybody wants to hire them, they need to get to them quicker than later.
Okay, so you convinced me that interest rates are going to go up 75 basis points, 3/4 of a point.
Yes,
You're thinking the same?
yes,
Okay. And we both think inflation, where it has dipped, has the tendency, and it's just being driven by energy policy. And I know we're in the energy belt. And when I say energy, let's just say oil. It is oil.
Yeah.
It's no other form of energy. It is oil. It could be natural gas. With what's going on in Europe with the huge natural gas shortages, the opportunity to export natural gas to and help our European trading partners on basically what's happened in Ukraine. So those are those three. So we're on the same on interest rates are going to continue to climb. Inflation is going to, the last one, recession. A mentor of maybe both of ours, Dr. Mark Evans, was in here in March, and he seemed to think the first quarter in 2023 could yield a recession.
That's what about 74% of the economists surveyed also believe.
So they're coming around to Dr. Evans' thinking is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to say Q1. I think we could be in a recession now, but I'm going to say Q4 of this year. We'll finally say we're in a recession.
Sure. Now, the data at the moment doesn't indicate we're in a recession at the moment, but doesn't mean that we can't be next quarter or early quarter in 23.
About a month ago, Elon Musk, who did speak at our in our Dory Theater, the same one where you received your naturalization, said that we're in a recession now. This was 4 to 6 weeks ago.
Hey, he's been wrong more than he's been right. So
okay, there you have it. Okay, let's go to see what we have as far as questions. It's a great opportunity to ask the economist. Look at there. It's just a comment, a blast from the past. Fledgling lecture of economy, economics at CSUB. Dr. Evans, Dr. Oswald. Did you know Dr. Oswald?
Yes, I did.
He apparently was before my time. And of course, Dr. Malexi, to mention a few professors. Kudos, fine presentation.
Thank you, Tony.
Hey, we'll leave it to me to ask the questions. I can ask Dr. Hegde questions all day long, but it looks like we're running out of time.
Yeah.
So there we go. And I know you defined it pretty much in your presentation. I've always gone with the 2 quarters. See, that was news to me today that it's not 2 quarters of negative growth, negative gross domestic product growth.
Right.
Because that has been an equation that many have used. Would you go with your definition again?
So that's the textbook definition of a recession, but the official definition of a recession is one that is decided upon by this group of economists in the National Bureau of Economic Research. So, and they look at more than just the declining GDP, they look at some other factors as well to decide. So it's technically the textbook definition is that, but the official definition is by these, and it's not limited to just the GDP quarter.
So it's going more subjective
rather
than analytical. Where you
it is analytical because they use data, but the data is beyond just the GDP measure.
Imagine me to use the textbook definition. That'll surprise a lot of people. Okay, well, that's going to wrap it up for today. Thanks, Aaron. Great presentation.
My pleasure.
Great to know more about what's going on in the economy. The economy plays such a huge role. Another question has come in. Yes, I did not talk about my observations in the hospitality industry because of limitations on time. So I'll do that next week, but you will get that. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be back next week, next Wednesday for number 129. Until then, everybody have a great week and we will see you then.
Thank you. Bye.